Okay, well, we are right at the top of the hour, so we'll go on and get started. I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. We are going to be covering Requirement 9 of the PCI Data Security Standard. And just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Everyone will remain muted throughout the webinar. And if you have any questions throughout the presentation, we encourage you to ask those using the Q&A feature that's located on the WebEx toolbar. So just to give you a little bit of background about who we are at Kirkpatrick Price, we are a PCI qualified security assessor and licensed CPA firm providing assurance services to clients worldwide. The firm has over 10 years of experience in information assurance by performing assessments, audits, and tests that strengthen information security and compliance controls. I would also like to take a moment to encourage you to find us on all the social medias. We have a blog where we post regular industry updates, tips, and best practices, so I would encourage you to subscribe to that as an additional educational resource, as well as check out our library of pre-recorded webinars on our website at the link there on the screen. We have all of the sessions, all the previous sessions of our PCI Readiness series on there, as well as a whole bunch of our other very popular webinar series. And I would also like to encourage you to connect with us on LinkedIn as well. To introduce our moderator for today, Jessie Skibby. She has over 15 years of experience in information security, and as Vice President of Strategic Development and Chief Compliance Officer for Kirkpatrick Price, she is focused on assisting clients in meeting regulatory compliance and information security objectives. And as you can see, she has a lot of very impressive certifications. She's a Certified Credit and Collections Compliance Officer. She has the ACA Scholar designation. She is also a Certified Information Systems Security Professional and a DBA Certified Receivables Compliance Professional. So welcome, Jessie.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm really happy to be here today talking about this topic. The one thing you don't really see on my profile here is that I am a former information security officer, and I did need to maintain compliance with PCI, some years ago. So I love the fact that we as a firm are producing such content out there for people that are working towards PCI compliance. So I hope that you take advantage of it. I hope that you take advantage of the ability to ask questions throughout the presentation. Take advantage of having Mr. Jeff Wilder with us, an expert in this field, to answer any questions that you might have. So let's go ahead and jump in and get to the next slide here. So a little bit about us, Kirkpatrick Price. We have a magnitude of services that we offer as a firm. We're primarily an information security auditing firm. We do also offer consulting and guidance in different areas. Regulatory compliance as well as information security is our focus. So we do a lot of work in the credit and collection space, as well as the mortgage industry and several others that are under CFPB scrutiny right now. We do a lot of guidance, audit services, policy and procedure, drafting, consulting, risk assessment, risk analysis in the healthcare space is a big issue right now, as well as we can help a variety of companies with their vendor compliance management programs, both performing auditing and consulting services. On the information security side of our business, we are a PCI QSA, obviously. We are also a CPA firm, so we're performing SOC 2, FCA 16. One thing that's not on here, we're doing a lot of HIPAA audits as of recent, and we also do FISMA. So the one thing that makes us especially unique in the multiple industries that we solve is that we serve is that we can kind of solve that problem of needing multiple audits. So we are one firm that can provide a multitude of audit services with a company that needs that type of thing. So we can go on to the next slide. So we're here today to talk about PCI DSS. So what is it? Hopefully you're not asking yourself that for the first time, but I will go through this very basic concept here. So the payment card industry data security standard, the PCI DSS, was jointly developed by the payment card brands to encourage and enhance cardholder data security and facilitate the broad adoption of consistent data security measures globally. I mean, that's a really big statement for basically a uniform, set of guidance for protecting cardholder data. Full compliance with 3.0 revised standard became effective January 1st. Now we're talking about 3.2 in the next webinar. So this is continually evolving and continually changing, and I think it just shows that the industry obviously has to respond with, data security breaches, incidents, things that are happening right now to companies. So not only staying up to date with what is, the current requirements, but what is coming down the road as well, and continually working on improving your data security program within your company is very critical. So I'm glad to see that actually some of our existing clients are attending this webinar, because that shows that you're working on due diligence, and that's absolutely what we like to see, as well as some new people that we really haven't had the opportunity to do business with yet. So you're here because you want to learn more about PCI and how to comply with it, and continuing to enhance your own practices is obviously what's very critical in today's environment. So we can go to the next slide. So who does PCI apply to? Any merchant who stores, processes, or transmits cardholder data, any service provider who stores, processes, or transmits cardholder data on behalf of a merchant, or any sub-service provider of a merchant or service provider who has an active access to the cardholder data environment. So basically, if you're storing, processing, or transmitting cardholder data, PCI applies to you. So we can go to the next slide. So an overview of the PCI DSS, there's approximately 394 controls. So it is not, it's not a simple thing that you implement in weeks. It's a much more lengthy process. 6 major control objectives and 12 subject areas, which I believe on the next slide we go into a little bit more detail with a graph that can show you. So this is basically the overview of what PCI DSS encompasses. So with, starting with the beginning, building and maintaining a secure network, requirement 1 and 2 obviously are very applicable to that. And one thing I wanted to mention here is you can read all this yourself, but we've taken the time to go through each of these requirements step by step. And as Sarah mentioned, we have a wealth of information on our website, pre-recorded webinars where we actually go through each of these step by step with you. And obviously, if there's any question on any of these requirements, we're always here to serve you and answer your questions and be the best support that we could possibly be. So we are on requirement 9 today, but obviously we'll be continuing with 10, 11, 12 to complete the series. And then we also have, I know, an upcoming webinar talking about the changes in the next revision. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide, because I would like to get out of the way and introduce you to Jeff Wilder. Jeff has over 15 years of experience in information security. Prior to joining us at Kirkpatrick Price, he was a trainer for the PCI Security Standards Council, where he was responsible for educating individuals working towards becoming QSA, Qualified Security Assessor. So I wanted to really make you understand what this means. So anybody out there performing PCI audits today would have to go through a similar training program to become a QSA. So Jeff was the instructor. Actually, he was my instructor several years or so ago when I first became a QSA. So Jeff, wanted to welcome you and bring you into the conversation so I can take a step back. But thank you for joining us today, Jeff.
Hey, thank you for the warm introductions there, Jesse. So, yeah, like I said, a little bit about myself. I live, eat, and breathe this stuff. I absolutely love, security. I love this industry. And it's a great place to be right now. There's a lot of interesting perspectives that we as a company have been able to bring to our clients and present opportunities for improvement and help our clients through that. So we're doing really great things here, Jesse. All right, Sarah, if I can get you to go ahead and move on. So I want to spend a little bit of time and talk about scoping. I'm not going to stand up here and, as you know, read off the slides, but one of the most important things about understanding the scope of your environment is that if you don't know that an asset exists, or if you don't understand that this particular asset has the ability to impact cardholder data, how can you as an organization really look to protect it appropriately? So one of the most important things that you do as an organization is to maintain the scope of the PCI DSS. And so I really start every presentation with this, and the reason being is when you're setting the scope of your environment, when we get into requirement 9 is really focused on the physical security of your environment. And focusing in on how the scope of that applies is really any place where you store, process, or transmit cardholder data, those facilities or those areas would be considered in scope, and all of these controls that we're going to be talking about would necessarily apply. All right, Sarah, if I can go ahead and get you to index that. So let's look at the PCI DSS, right, the CDE, as it relates to requirement 9 is the areas where you're storing, processing, and transmitting cardholder data. In most situations, everybody would think about, well, yeah, it's my data center. We know that that's in scope, and and just kind of leave it at there. But really, from an audit perspective, right, when the auditor shows up and they're looking to assess your organization, if you have a call center and in that call center those individuals are interacting with cardholder data over the phone or perhaps writing them down to have help with a customer service issue, those areas would be considered in scope as well. All right, so understand that when we say something is not in scope, the assumption is that particular asset or that environment has no ability to impact cardholder data at all, right? So spend some time in really looking at your environments, looking at how you interact with cardholder data, looking at, where you interact with cardholder data. You might find the accounting department or you might find your customer service areas may not have been considered in scope in the past, but if you really do the analysis, you might find out that they are. All right, let's go ahead and move forward, Sarah. So now, as we present this series for Ask the Auditor around PCI DSS, we find ourselves at requirement 9. And really, requirement 9 is about restricting access to those individuals that truly need it. And this is really from a physical security perspective. We're going to talk about, all of those requirements as it relates to hardening your environment, right? Let's keep the bad people or the people that are not necessary to have access into those environments. Let's keep them out. Okay. So Sarah, if we can go ahead and move forward. So when we look at requirement 9.1, right, and we start off by making sure that we have physical control to prevent those individuals that should not be in those restricted areas from actually having it. And really what that requires is that you have doors, locks on the doors, or you have badged accesses. And where we find a lot of times this particular control becomes a challenge for most organizations is in the call center environment. So if you have a call center that interacts with cardholder data and, really anybody can come in and out of the environment, that might be a challenge for you. Okay, and so for those areas, we need to have some type of way to monitor who goes in and out of the environment, right? So what the PCI DSS requirement says is that you either have to have a video camera system, right, and we're going to keep that data for 90 days, or we have, some type of badged access. One of the misunderstandings is that that a lot of organizations believe, and this is because of past PCI DSS requirements, is that you had to have a camera system, and that is really no longer the case. You don't have to have a camera system as long as you have a badging system or something that says that Johnny or Susie or Betty came into that door, right? So as long as we have that and we're maintaining that data for 90 days and we're reviewing those logs, or reviewing that data, will be okay. So it's not necessary that you have video cameras, it's and/or access control mechanisms to monitor the entry and exit. All right, so that's really one of the nice takeaways about 911, or sorry, 911. A lot of times your video cameras are not capable because of the size of the hard drives. They're not capable of storing 90 days worth of data. And that's quite all right as long as you have a badge system. If you have a badging system that records that data for 90 days, you should be okay. All right, Sarah, we can go ahead and move forward.
Hey, Jeff, I just wanted to interject really quick. I forgot to mention the QA feature. The QA feature is up on the toolbar under Options. And if anybody in the audience wants to ask a question, we're definitely going to save time at the end for questions. If not, if it's something really relevant to what Jeff's talking about, I may interrupt him to ask it. So I just wanted to encourage everybody listening to use the Q&A feature to ask a question.
Very nice. Thank you. All right, so we come to the next requirement, and it's we want to be able to restrict the network jack, right, to those areas that are considered sensitive, and we do not want to have these network jacks accessible to the public. There was, several years ago, one of the big attacks that have occurred is there was you walk into the main reception area and there was a big credenza there, and behind the credenza was a network jack, and somebody basically plugged in a wireless access device and sat across the street in a hotel for several months skimming data out of their environment, right? So any place that's publicly accessible, we need to make sure that we're restricting access to those jacks, right? So there's a couple of ways that we can do that. We can literally just disable the port, and that will work just fine. Or we want to make sure that those network jacks, if they need to be live for some reason, do not terminate from a network perspective into your cardholder data environment. That would be a bad thing. So let's have a really quick conversation about what we would consider to be publicly accessible, right? And really, publicly accessible is a place where the general public would have unfettered access or unrestricted access to. And typically, we might find that in, the receptionist area, or maybe perhaps the public, if there's a bathroom, make sure that if there are network jacks in there, that those are disabled. If there are situations where you bring, somebody into a conference room for a conference and you leave those individuals unattended, or leave them there to their own devices, basically those then would be considered a publicly accessible network jack. So if you're monitoring, if you're escorting these individuals, those areas would not be considered publicly accessible. Okay. The next one is that if you have any publicly accessible, or if you have any wireless access points or gateways or handheld devices, those need to be restricted, right? Because from an attacker's perspective and an attacker's point of view, if I have physical access to the wires, to the wireless devices, or to those, to the networking devices as a whole, I can pretty much assure you that I can gain access to your environment. And really, where this might become a bigger issue is in a retail environment. A lot of companies have these handheld inventory devices for scanning, their inventory, scanning the barcode, the little handheld devices. And a lot of times those devices are actually an 802.11 wireless device, and they're running a version of Windows on the back end. And I've been, involved in a penetration test where I walked into the store and I picked up one of these devices. I looked at the config, and lo and behold, here's the wireless access point that it's connected to. I dumped the configs, and now I had the authentication credentials to get into their wireless. The other side of that as well is that if you have a wireless device in your facility, right, and you have it protected with, passwords and all those great things, if I can get physical access to it, all I have to do is just walk around the back side of it and hit the reset button, right, and set it back to its default settings, which is admin, set it up as I want to, and move forward. All right, so
hey,
let's
Jeff,
go ahead
somebody's asking on the same topic is, as far as the physical access, is putting those wireless devices in the ceiling, does that work?
So I would say absolutely. So, put them in a place where that it would be very obvious if somebody had to crawl up on a table or put a ladder, right, and they would be obvious that they're getting into things. But if I can, as an assessor, or, even if I'm running a penetration test, or, playing the role of a hacker, if I can just literally reach up and touch it with my hand, that's really not physically restricted. But I think putting it in the ceiling is a really good option for that. There was an assessment that I went on one time where we have to validate, any wireless devices, and the client was saying, we don't have any wireless devices here. And lo and behold, there was a wireless device, and so we went on a search for, the good part of a half a day trying to find this thing, and it was an old legacy device that had been disabled, but somebody had put it in the ceiling. So, use your discretion with that. If they're not generally accessible just by reaching up and grabbing it, you're fine. If you have to, get a ladder or crawl up on a table or get up on a chair, it would be obvious what somebody was trying to do. So yeah, so putting it in the ceiling, I think, would be just fine. Okay, Sarah, we can go ahead and move forward. So the next thing is that we have to develop a method to easily identify those individuals that are supposed to be there from those individuals that should not be there. And really, this is one of those situations where from an assessor perspective, I think that there's some latitude in how this actually gets implemented. there's a lot of assessments. There's a lot of times we'll show up on site, and there might be 10 or 12 people, right? And everybody knows everybody intimately, and everybody knows, you know, exactly what somebody looks like. And so if a third party shows up on site and starts roaming the halls, you know, those individuals know that that person shouldn't be there, right? But if you're, you know, a company of 100 people or 70 people, or if you're in an environment where you have a, you know, a high turnover of staff, like in a call center, that's really where we start needing to have these badges, right? And we'll talk about this process in a few minutes. But requirement 9.2 establishes the need for having some type of identification. So let's go ahead and move forward. All right. So we need to be able to control access into these environments where we've identified as being in scope. And when we look at that first requirement where it says access must be restricted to based on must be authorized and based on individual job function, this is really a hook or something that you need to include within your requirement 7, which is the authorization, right? Requirement 7, for those of you that have been part of this series, requirement 7 is about authorization. And so as part of your user request list, right, what I would recommend that you do is ensure that if somebody needs access to those sensitive areas, right, the call centers, the data centers perhaps, is that you have something in there that then authorizes those individuals to have physical access, as well as the logical access that we would normally be used to seeing as part of that, okay? Now, the next item here that we need to talk about is that, you know, if you have somebody that is no longer with the company, we expect that those individuals to have their access immediately revoked. And this is where, you know, badge access is easy enough to do. You can just go and shut off the access to it. But, you know, if these individuals have keys, physical keys to get into the facility or get into those areas where, you know, that we would identify as sensitive, we would look for you to ask for those keys back as a means for immediately revoking these individuals' access into these environments. Okay, so once again, you need to make sure that you're actually authorizing these individuals' access, and typically what that assessment looks like is your assessor will be kind of roaming around where, you know, the sensitive people might be, and they might point 2 or 3 people out and say, I want to see the user access request that shows that these individuals have been authorized to be here. And so it's a pretty simple test. It's pretty easy to take care of, okay? So let's go ahead and move forward. 9.4. So it's very often, right, that your organization will have visitors, and this might be friends and family that come into the facility for one reason or another, or it might be a vendor or perhaps even a business partner. And where we have these individuals that are not considered employees, where they have access into the sensitive areas, right? And those sensitive areas are any place where cardholder data is stored, processed, or transmitted. We need to make sure that these individuals are authorized and they're also being escorted at all times, right? So it's not acceptable to bring in a vendor, if you would, and allow them, you know, an HVAC vendor, and allow them to have unrestricted access into your data center, right? It would be expected that these individuals are going to be monitored and escorted and making sure that they're not going to do anything silly. Now, the next one is that these individuals need to be given some type of identification, as we talked about in the requirement just a few minutes ago. We need to have a process to identify who's a visitor and who's an employee. When these visitors leave the facility at the end of the day, we expect you to ask for that badge or that whatever that token might be. You know, if it's a simple little sticky note that says, "Hi, my name is Bob," you know, just make sure that the last person that would interact with them would ask for that back. And that can either be your receptionist or the person that's actually escorting them. So it doesn't need to be a big drawn out deal, but we need to be able to ask for that access back when the individual leaves the facility, okay? Let's go ahead and move on. As we just talked about in the prior requirement is that when these visitors have these badges, they need to be set to expire in some capacity, right? They need to be asked for back. As we look at 9.4.3, when they're leaving the facility, they're going to be asking for that badge back. Now, we need to have some means to track who came into the facility, and this is going to be needed and required in 2 places. It needs to be required into the actual facility itself, and then into those sensitive areas, right, where there's a data center. And this list, it's pretty simple what it needs, right? It needs to contain the visitor's name, who they're from, and the person that's authorizing their access into the facility. Now, as an assessor, this is one control. While it's incredibly simple to manage, you believe it or not, this is one control that probably failed about 80% of the time. And the reason why it failed so much is for one of 2 reasons. One is it didn't, you know, it would have the, you know, the phase of the moon, and it would have, you know, the date and time and all of this great information, but it would often be missing a piece of the information that was required, such as the people that were authorizing the access into the facility. Or secondary to that is that all of those fields would exist, and as an assessor, we have to make sure that you keep 90 days worth of that data. So we would look at the data and we would kind of flip back through it, and then we would find out that while those fields exist, that it wasn't totally populated. So from your organization's perspective, have a look at the entry points into the data center and the entry points into the facility, and making sure that these particular fields are present. And then secondary to that is making sure that the visitors or the person authorizing their access is making sure that it's actually filled out, okay? So let's go ahead and move forward. Requirement 951. So next is we have to have some processes in place where we're looking to secure the media, right? And we're not just talking about tape backups. You know, if you remember years ago, the old machines that used to, we called them knuckle busters, where you would put a card in the machine and swipe it. Those are still used today. If you have those physical instruments, right, where you're keeping them for tax records or legal records, you know, we have to have a process in place to physically secure those. If we have media, you know, backup tapes, right, we have to have a process where we're securing the tapes themselves and visiting the facilities and making sure that the facility where they're stored are being secured, and that we're actually going to be performing an inventory of those tapes and that data at least annually. All right, Sarah, if we can go ahead and move forward. So it's not just it's not acceptable just to have these processes in place and through the data sitting around and then through some type of tribal knowledge. We know that only Larry or only the managers or the backup administrators get access to them, you know, from a tribal knowledge perspective. We're actually looking to making sure that that we have a documented process, right, for maintaining the access to who has the data itself. We have to have a process. We have to have some type of documented procedure and policy, if you would, that denotes that we need to classify our data. And really what that looks like is that as an assessor, if I would walk into a facility and I see a tape that's sitting there, if I'm to pick up that tape and point at it and say, tell me how this particular data is classified, within some particular short order, right, the organization or the people that I'm working with should be able to tell me how that data is classified. And the easiest way, if you don't have a process in place to manage this, what I see often right now is that a lot of organizations are saying, you know, we don't know specifically what type of information is on this tape. Therefore, what we're going to do is we're going to just say that all media on tape is considered sensitive or private or however that they want to do that. Okay? So we need to make sure that we're classifying that data. And we need to make sure that if we're sending that media off-site, that it needs to be done by secure courier and that it's tracked. And to give you a little bit of background as to why this is a particular requirement, there was a time when an organization had their administrators, they had an off-site storage facility. It was actually a safe in a warehouse, that every day the administrator would take these tapes and put them in a box and drive over to this facility, put this box in the back of their truck and drive over to this facility and put these tapes inside of the safe that they had, and then pull the tapes that were in there from the prior day and pull these back. This individual happened to stop for gas or for something at a gas station at one point, and those tapes were stolen. And so we now, because of that, we now have a requirement that says that we need to make sure that they're sent by secure courier. So a lot of times if you're using a company like Iron Mountain, they have the means and methods to securely transmit those tapes, and it needs to be tracked, right? So at any point in the life cycle of that tape, you need to know where it's at. And so typically what happens from an assessment perspective is that we'll look at the inventory of your tapes or your media and say, where is this media at today, right? And you should be able to tell me that within short order where that media is physically held. Okay, Sarah, let's go ahead and move forward. Okay, so 963. Well, this next one says that management needs to prove where the data is being sent. Now, I don't necessarily believe that the intent behind this is that every time that Iron Mountain shows up, right, that management approves it and say, yes, I approve that this particular tape gets sent off to Iron Mountain. What this is about is management needs to be aware of where their physical media is stored, right, and they're going to be the ones that are approving it. So as part of this, if the tapes are going off-site, we need to have either a manager or a manager's delegate, say, okay, we know that these tapes have left the facility. We just don't want, the organization showing up like Iron Mountain, just showing up, picking up tapes without anybody's acknowledgement that the tapes have actually been removed. The other part of that is that we want management to understand where their media is at. So if it's being sent off to Iron Mountain, of course they're aware of it because they probably put a contract in place to address that. But is it appropriate to take your tapes and put them in a cardboard box and put them in the back of a car and drive them over to a warehouse and put them in a locked cage? Is management really approving that? And that's really what this particular requirement is looking to ascertain. All right, so let's go ahead and move forward. So the next thing is that we need to actually, identify where, as we've talked about earlier, we need to be able to identify where our tapes are at, right? So we have to have this secure tracking media. A lot of times organizations might only have 6 tapes or 7 tapes or 8 tapes that they keep in rotation, and those tapes are recalled every week. And I think upon that is you really don't need to visit the facility and making sure that the tapes are there, right? The fact that you see the tapes every week, and if one was missing, you would know about it. But what happens if you have 50 or 60 tapes, right? What happens if you have 400 or 500 tapes? It's not often that I've dealt with organizations that have, hundreds of tapes. And in that case, they would have no clue if a tape is missing or not. And so what's required here is that you as an organization need to go visit the facility where the tapes are physically stored, and you're going to be making sure that the physical facility is itself secured, and secondary is at that same time, and you're going to be performing an inventory of those tapes and making sure that they're still there, okay? And just keep, for an audit perspective, what I would recommend that you do is just keep some artifact that you went to the facility and validated all of those tapes were there. And a little bit of story behind this, there was a very large retail merchant that went to recall their tapes from their tape provider. And the tapes didn't show up, and so they recalled them again, and the tapes never showed up. And they went and they called the organization that was maintaining these tapes, and come to find out that this organization that was maintaining these tapes for them had sent them off to some other third party and had lost custody of them and could no longer track where they were physically at. And so that caused some concerns. And so that's really the purpose behind this, is making sure that, if you believe your data is still there, that it's still physically in place. Okay, so let's go ahead and move forward. Now the next one, when we look at requirement 3.1, and I'm going to take you back a little bit, requirement 3.1 talked about having a policy and procedure in place that defined your data retention policy. So one of the things that's going to happen is that from an assessment perspective is we're going to get your data retention and your data destruction policy and look at what is the time frame that you either, from a business or from a legal perspective that you're keeping the data. Now, where this data is physically being kept, that's fine. There's no problem with that. But it's not okay to keep that data after your retention period has expired. So while requirement 3 really focuses on the data, the ones and zeros, right, requirement 9 still has that same requirement, but as it relates to the physical media, right? So if you have print media that contains cardholder data, if you have tapes that contain cardholder data, and that data has expired, right, based on your retention policy, we would expect you to have a process where you're securely deleting that data. Okay, so you're going to, if it's paper media, you're going to shred it, incinerate it, burn it, pulp it, whatever it takes to make sure that that particular data can no longer be rendered usable. A lot of times, I'm sure that you might have seen where they have paper shredders that cut it up into little tiny, about quarter-inch by quarter-inch pieces of square paper, or shreds it so fine that for a piece of paper, it shreds it into about 3,000 little strips. Something like that is acceptable. Secondary to that is that if you have these shred bins, right, that are hanging out around your facility for destroying physical print media that might contain cardholder data, what we expect is that those particular shred bins are locked. And a lot of times as an assessor, what happens is we walk around, we try to lift the lid, we try to open the doors, and making sure, if I can reach in the little hole there and pull the data out, that might be a concern, okay? So the last bullet point there that we're going to talk about is if your organization has hard drives that are end of life that you are no longer going to be using, if you pulled a computer out of production and those particular computers had some type of hard drive that contained cardholder data, we have to have a process where we're rendering that data unrecoverable or unreadable. Now, please understand that when you run a delete command, or even if you format a drive, that data is not gone. From a forensics perspective, it only takes a blink of an eye to recover that data. So from a hard drive perspective, if you don't want to physically destroy the drive, that you run a tool like DBAN, right, which is Derek's boot and nuke. There's DoD wiping programs that will securely wipe that data from the hard drive. If you're not interested in keeping that hard drive, there's companies that will physically shred that drive or basically turn it into molten metal for you. So we need to make sure that not only the print media, but the hard drives themselves, when you're done with them and when that data has exceeded your retention period, that we are securely removing it. Okay, let's go ahead and move forward. Okay. Now, requirement 9.9 was a new requirement that came about with the advent between PCI DSS version 3.0 and 3.1. And what this particular requirement is about is that if you have a device that is physically involved with capturing of cardholder data, right, we need to maintain inventory control and management of these devices. And I like to tell these little stories, so I'll tell you another little story why this particular control came about. Several years ago, there was a bunch of hackers that went onto eBay or went onto some auction site, and they bought these little PTS devices where you swipe your card, capture cardholder data for payment. They bought several of these. And what they did is they opened up these devices and they compromised them. And they put these in an envelope and they shipped them to another merchant. And they told this merchant, here were your new POS vendors. These are your new latest, greatest versions. Please put this one in next to your terminal, right? And put the old one that you're pulling out. Put that back in this into this FedEx envelope and ship that back to us. And so the store manager would oblige, and the particular PTS device would be swapped out, with a compromised one. And now the hackers had some, brand new devices in their custody that then they could compromise. And they ended up compromising about 400 point-of-sale devices before it was all said and done, right? So effectively, what we need to do here is that if you have a device that captures cardholder data, we need to maintain inventory controls over that. And remember that this is not just the actual PTS device that would sit next to your register. If you're a merchant environment and you have a keyboard, right, that swipes a card, if you have that little card swiping device that velcros onto the side of the monitor or on the top of the monitor, right, this particular control would apply. And so not getting this right can be a difficult task. In my opinion, this is not done right. This can be a really burdensome particular requirement, especially if you're a large organization. So as we get into this, we need to maintain a list of the make and model of all the devices, where you physically have these devices located, and something that can uniquely identify this device. And that can be a serial number or, you know, a sticker or an asset tag ID, something that says that this belongs to you. And effectively what this assessment looks like is, all right, show me, I want to see this list. And what we'll do is we'll take that list and we'll go to those physical locations and say, okay, show me this particular serial number, you know, that you have for this device, and actually observe them. And we'll talk about that here in a few minutes. Let's go ahead and move forward, Sarah. So you as an organization need to periodically inspect these devices, right? There's an organization, if you're not familiar with Krebs on security, he has a really great expose on an attack that happened. And you can see exactly what happened with these devices that were compromised for that attack that I just talked about, right? So you need to be able to train your staff on the frequency and the methods and means for interacting with these devices and making sure that that these particular devices have not been compromised in any way. And so you're going to identify what that looks like, the frequency by which it's done, and making sure that your organization is actually doing that and retaining some type of artifact, making sure that for your tracking perspective that the reviews are actually being done. Your assessor will be looking for that information. Okay, let's go ahead and move forward. So we've already talked about this a little bit, that you need to provide training to the staff, right? And typically what I like to see from an assessment perspective is that if you have a merchant or retail environment, is that you include this particular training for, how to identify if somebody shows up and say, hi, I'm Johnny, I'm your new PTS or your POS vendor, I'm here to replace things, that you train them on how to vet these individuals as making sure that they are really who they are. Train your staff that they shouldn't be installing or replacing these devices without having some type of verification. If they, have a new PTS device that show up and says, hi, I'm Johnny, I'm your new PTS vendor, and here's your newest, latest, greatest, that they would know to actually get a hold of somebody to validate that, yeah, we should be swapping those out. Right, just being suspicious of suspicious behavior around these devices, right, and just to be aware of it. And who to report any of this suspicious behavior to. I'll tell you another little quick story. There was two men, and I've seen the video of this, the camera video of it, and there was these two suspicious men that walked into a facility, and they said, hi, we're from the corporate facility. We're going to be swapping out your server rack. We have a new server rack that we need to put in place for your point of sale systems. And the manager said fine, and the guys walked into the back of the room and unbolted their entire server rack and wheeled it out on a dolly, put it in their back of their van, and drove off. And about 2 hours later, this manager calls up the corporate office and says, hey, when are you going to bring us our new server rack? And they're like, what are you talking about? And so this is an example of why we need this type of training, right, to inspect, the devices for tampering, to making sure that, we know who to talk to and what to be said, and making sure that if somebody shows up pretending to be somebody that they're not, that you have a process for reporting that type of behavior. Okay, so let's go ahead and move forward. Okay. And the last one that we're going to be looking at here is that we need, from requirement 9.10, is that capstone that we're always talking about. So we have to have a process where all of this, the procedures and all of this, the processes and all of the policies that we've just been talking about in requirement 9, that it's actually there. And as part of that, we need to make sure that we educate our staff on how to implement these policies, and that it's clearly defined what that looks like. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and move forward. So I want to thank you for attending the webinar on Requirement 9 just in a few minutes. I'm going to be turning this over to, I see that we have a couple of questions here, but I want to spend a little bit of time in providing a plug for our next webinar. Our next webinar is going to be on the deltas between PCI DSS version 3.1 and 3.2. There are some significant changes that have happened here, especially if you're a service provider. So it might be a good time for you to spend a little bit of an extra hour. That'll be here in a couple weeks. Look forward to that. So Jesse, I want to go ahead and turn it back over to you. I see that we have a question in the portal.
Yeah, we actually do have a couple questions, Jeff, and a couple of them are related to video tape monitoring, but the one I want to ask first is a very, very good question submitted by one of our attendees, and the question is, if cardholder data is segmented in the cloud or data center and no cardholder data is present in my office, do I need to implement the visitor badge controls within my office?
Right. So once again, that's a really good question, and it really comes down to scoping, right? So remember, Jesse, that in order to determine or to make the statement that something is out of scope, there's no ability for that environment, in this case, to impact the security of your cardholder data. So while cardholder data itself may not necessarily reside in that facility, if I can sit down at a computer that has database access and I can dump the entire database for the data that resides out in the cloud, right, you can see how in that situation that might impact the security of the cardholder data, and we would look for controls in that. Remember that we're talking about the physical controls necessary to restrict the access to the data, right? So whether the data is in the cloud or local to you, if you can impact the security of it from this facility, and we really deem that as a sensitive area. If you're storing, processing, or transmitting cardholder data, in this case you might be transmitting cardholder data or you might be processing cardholder data, it would be considered in scope, and those particular controls would need to apply. But if the particular facility that you're referring to has no access to the cardholder data environment at all, and it's just merely a business facility and there's no way to impact the security of credit card, then those particular controls would not be necessary.
Okay, great. The other question, it looks like we have a couple of small businesses that are listening in. So the one question is, I'm a small business with limited staff to dedicate to monitoring. Do I need to have someone actively monitoring my security cameras?
Well, the requirement is that you're monitoring them, right? And I don't necessarily think that means that you have somebody sitting there 24/7 watching the matrix waterfall. Mm-hmm. But to me, what this really means is that you do have a process where you are perhaps looking through, on a daily basis or on a weekly basis, that you are monitoring the data. You need to look at kind of as part of your risk management framework, right, and your risk management strategies, that you're going to be doing as part of Requirement 12. One of the things that you should do is define, what is an acceptable level of risk, right? Whether we're monitoring those weekly, daily, hourly, every second is really up to the organization to do that. But you have to have a process for monitoring the cameras in those environments.
So another related question is, do I really have to have video cameras? I mean, I have all of my doors covered and we're a small office. I thought that was a great question. Yeah,
so what the requirement says is that you have to have the entry and the exit points, right? So if the area that you're talking about is used for storing, processing, or transmitting cardholder data, it's a sensitive area, then we at that point we really need to have either cameras, right, monitoring the entry-exit points, or some type of badged access, or something that denotes that Tommy, Larry, Susie, Betty, Jody went through the door. There are exclusions for this particular, what we consider sensitive areas. The retail point-of-sale systems, right, the retail areas are not considered sensitive areas. But, a lot of times where we really focus these particular controls are like in the call center areas and then in the data centers, right? So if you have a data center with a, 2 doors, then we would expect to see cameras or badging systems at each door. You don't have to have cameras, right? That's what we were saying earlier. We don't have to have cameras. But we have to have something that monitors the entry points and the exit points to that environment. Okay.
Great. Well, that is all the questions that I saw come in.
Okay, I have a couple here. One of them was somebody wanted to know the name of the software that I used for wiping of hard drives. And that particular tool is called DBAN, D-B-A-N. And what you do is you can download the software, and it makes a bootable disk. And I believe the actual name of the software is Derek's Boot and Nuke. Okay, and you can set up a DoD wipe with that particular tool. Okay, and that was the only question then that I saw.
Great. Well, I guess if anybody has any other follow-up questions, we have our contact information there on that last slide, and I know the slides will be sent out after the presentation. So as Jeff mentioned, coming up next, we continue our Ask the Auditor series with what's new in PCI DSS 3.2. That'll be a really valuable session to let everybody know what's coming up and what's changed in the latest version of the DSS. That's going to be June 1st at 1 p.m. Eastern, and the link there to register for the webinar is there, but you also get an invitation in your email since you're attending today. So I think that wraps it up for us today. Yep. Thank you so much, Jeff, for all of the valuable content, and thank you, Sarah, for moving the slides and for hosting this for us, and we look forward to everyone attending on the next session.
Thank you, Jesse. Have a good day.
Thank you. You too. Goodbye.